Hi, everybody. If you can hear me, if you can see me, please let me know in the comments. Please let me know in the comments. And welcome to everybody from all the different places that you guys are calling in from today. I saw some Wisconsin. I saw some Atlanta. I've seen some of everything, but we are so grateful that you guys decided to join us today. You guys definitely must want to know how to pitch to Condé Nast, because this is the highest registration we have had ever. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. Just some housekeeping notes, you all. I just want to say sorry for the confusion. Every single Black Travel Alliance webinar, unfortunately, Hopin will let you in 30 minutes before. So I know it sends you the email and says the event is starting now, but normally it doesn't start to another 30 minutes. So thank you all, those who came in early. If you have to leave, that is no worries. We will be sending the replay after this. I also want to let you guys know that on next Tuesday, we will be having how to pitch to brands. So today you have how to pitch to Condé Nast. Next Tuesday, you have how to pitch to brands. You can sign up for that one as well. And then in November, we have the Wavelength event. So stay tuned for all of those things. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to read our guest bios, and then I'm going to peace out and be in the comments with y'all, because I want to know how to pitch to Condé Nast too. We're all in the same boat. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our guest. So first up, this beautiful lady on the screen is Miss Davida. Davida is a founder of BTA, as well as a writer, destination marketer, and travel content creator at Wonders of Wonders. She's worked with a variety of brands and marketing roles at companies such as London and Partners, Travel Brands, and Coventry and Jeers as UK City of Culture 2021. She is Ghanaian born, bred, watered. I love that, Davida. And she transplanted to Paris, London, and elsewhere in the UK, and generally lives in a permanent state of wanderlust. Davida has been named amongst Europe's travel industry leaders, change makers in tourism and social impact, and UK travel thought leaders and content creators to follow. Welcome, Davida. We are so happy to have you here as our moderator. You guys, I say all the time, this woman writes like an angel. I haven't ever read something that sounds so just literally like God penned it himself. But from her, if you read some of her writings, they are so good. They are so good. And next, I am going to introduce Miss Lale. Lale, I'm not even going to try to butcher your last name. So when you come up, you can let people know how to pronounce it. But I was like, listen, what I'm not going to do is that, okay?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Lale is the Articles director of Condé Nast Traveler, working across print and digital. She also hosts the Women Who Travel podcast, whoop, whoop, and taped live episodes at events like Pitchfork Music Festival in Chicago, South by Southwest in Austin, and Feast Portland. She's a frequent guest on WNYC and Cheddar, and she has been featured in Glamour Magazine, The Daily Beast, and many more. Prior to joining Condé Nast Traveler, Lale was a managing editor at the New York Observer. So you can find her on Instagram at Lale Hannah, and I will drop that in there. Thank you for giving us your Instagram, y'all. Don't be worrying her in your Instagram, in her Instagram DMs, please. Okay. So you guys, I'm gonna sign out. Davida, I'm taking it away to you.
All right, Lale, can you hear me still okay? And
I can.
Hopefully everyone else?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay. So if I talk over you, I apologize. I'm not interrupting. We're blaming the internet.
That is absolutely fine with me. So, Lale, I'm really excited about our chat. And, I know we're a virtual room full of travel content creators in various mediums. So I'm actually really glad for your time this evening for us to be able to chat pitching to Condé Nast Traveler. So let's start from the top. What makes a good pitch?
Oh, that is a great question. Sometimes it feels like a little bit of a secret recipe. And even after all these years as an editor and a writer, I never strike lucky every time. But But there are some sort of key principles that I think as a freelance writer that you can kind of play by when you're pitching. Firstly, you know, don't just forward a press release or copy and paste what that press release is. Think about what your angle is. It's not just, I want to write about TK Place. It's not about just, I want to write about this piece of travel news. It's, what's your point of view? What is the angle? What makes it unique to Condé Nast Traveler? And part of doing that is also going to be checking if we've covered the story before, or if other outlets have already covered it and you still think that it's worthy of exposure and of telling that story. What's the new way you're going to tell it? What sets your story idea and your pitch apart from the other conversations that are being had around it? And then also, if it's you're featuring a personality, or you know, you're doing some sort of profile, you know, is the story an exclusive? And also, do you have access to the person already? And I think this also goes for if you're pitching a reported trip, for example, like, is the trip already booked? Are you already going? If not, what access do you have to the place? Who will be your sources? All this information, if you come up front with it, will make it so much easier for the editor to assess whether they want to move forward with that idea, and also just start to have more conversations about shaping it. And then also, I think something that's really, really important, and I have a feeling we're going to get into this later in the conversation, is ask yourself if you're the best person to tell that story. You know, especially I think with travel, it's something that we're thankfully talking more and more and more about. But if you're talking about a community or a certain set of traditions that you've experienced, you know, should you be writing this piece in the first place? And if you still think you are, what are the other voices you're going to include? And I think one other thing that's really important when you're pitching is to, if it was a press trip, to disclose upfront that it was. This is really important as an editor to know that this might be a trip that a couple of other writers have experienced. You might be pitching to other outlets. So it's just to kind of ensure that we're not getting the same story that might be getting pitched elsewhere. So just being super upfront about how you've like done the trip from the get-go just kind of just makes the whole process smooth from the beginning.
That's fantastic. So a few things kind of stand out to me from what you just said. So let's say, for instance, somebody wants to pitch something. As you said, you may have covered it, but they're coming at it from a different angle. What's the sort of gap in whether it's print, edition, or online that you would consider essentially the same destination, but potentially from a completely different angle?
That is a great question. So a story that might work for digital isn't necessarily going to work for print. Print, we work on a much longer lead time, you know, simply by the nature of the print cycle. You know, we're currently closing our December issue right now, and we're already thinking about our January, Feb, and our March issue, which feels slightly inconceivable in October, but that's kind of what we're working with. And even further ahead, I actually was in a conversation recently where someone brought up a story for 2024, which was like truly horrifying to hear.
Wow. That is extreme.
Yeah. You know, and especially with print, when you're thinking about seasonality, it's too late for us to get a ski story in our December or January, February issue now. So we were actually thinking about, okay, if someone is going to report a ski story this winter, that will be for the end of 2023. So really, if you want to pitch for print, think about those long lead times. Digital kind of gives you a little bit more freedom, where you can have a much faster turnaround on stories. You can react to news and changes within the industry in a far more instantaneous way, and be a little bit more nimble in the way that we cover things. But there's also certain circumstances when there's a story that works brilliantly for both. And it might be that you pitch something for digital and actually there is a place for it in print, particularly in our front of book, where we have, you know, some regular columns and more kind of like service journalism that lives at the front. And then in the feature, well, obviously we have our kind of meteor features.
Right. Okay. So you've mentioned that you know, people need to be a bit more upfront about what the trip details are. So let's say the factual elements of what they're pitching. Apart from that, can you talk a bit more about what helps people stand out? Leaving the factual side of things aside, like what would make you kind of sit up and pay attention if you were reading a pitch from a travel writer?
So I think, firstly, and this is, I think, just actually a really good exercise when you're trying to craft your pitch, is a really strong, punchy working headline that you can put in your subject line. Like if I see that headline while I'm scrolling through my inbox and it catches my eye, I'm immediately going to be like, I want to read more about this. This seems intriguing. And then also think of the pitch as a place to show off your voice and your writing skills. You know, as well as the idea from a pitch, you know, myself and other editors also want to see what sort of writer you are. So kind of, you know, it's only a paragraph, 2 paragraphs. And I would say for that also, don't make your pitch too long. Sometimes pitches will come through and they're almost like the length of what the entire story assignment would be. Keep it to 2 paragraphs. But yeah, really use it to kind of show off who you are as a writer and what your voice is like, because that's what we're really going to want to come through in the piece.
Can you talk a bit more about the narrative voice? I mean, I like your point about showing who you are as a writer and, you know, what your actual voice is going to be. So does the voice that you write in, for instance, the first person narrative or whatever, does that depend on what you're pitching, or should that kind of come across in, should you write it based on this is how I will write my pitch, or should you basically craft your pitch in the language, in the tone of voice that you would be going for, essentially?
I think it's the latter. I mean, obviously different types of stories warrant a slightly different type of voice. If it's, you know, a trend piece or something that is more news forward, it's going to be, you know, a lot straighter, a little less flowery. You're not going to really be able to have, you know, you're not going to want your kind of personality to come through quite as much, but you still want the copy to be clean and concise and clear and be demonstrative of what that story would be written like. If it's something that's more first person and it's an essay, you know, that's when you're really looking to see like, okay, like, who is this writer? What do they sound like? How are they going to tell this story? So it definitely is, you know, depends on what you're pitching. But I think inherently as a writer, when you're pitching that idea, you're going to kind of know what voice you want to tell it in as well. And also, it sounds really obvious, but as someone who has made this mistake myself, proofread your pitch.
Yeah.
The amount of times I've like sent a pitch to someone and then been like, oh my God, that spelling error is mortifying.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And it's like too late.
I know that feeling. I want us to come on to some of the myths of pitching. I know, for instance, that you know, some people are perhaps at the beginning of their travel writing career or maybe more established, and there's this idea that you have to have bylines and, you know, really, really big publications or whatever in order to put yourself forward. How do we get over this sort of hurdle that sometimes it's like we take ourselves out of the race, so to speak? And any sort of myths that you've heard about pitching or you've encountered along the way yourself working with various writers across the spectrum?
So I think, kind of to your first point, do not be discouraged if you haven't got many clips or they haven't been for major outlets. You know, people come into their writing careers at different points in their lives. And I also think that if you have an interesting story to tell, then that's going to come through in your pitch. And again, kind of going back to my point of using that pitch to really show off your writing skills, I think it's like, if it's a really well-written pitch and it's engaging, then I'm not even going to be that interested in looking at who you've written for before. If that story looks good and you are a talented writer, that is going to shine through. And so I think don't get hung up on it. And also do not be deterred when your first or second or third pitch doesn't get accepted. It's it's a lengthy process, and I think a lot of it can be to do with building up a relationship and a rapport with an editor or a set of editors, and just starting to start a conversation that allows you to figure out what that editor's looking for and what is right for that publication, because every publication is different. What Condé Nast Traveler looks for in pitches isn't necessarily going to be the same as, say, the travel section in the New York Times. Even though we are competitors, we're looking for different things. So really, like, take the time to start trying to build relationships with editors. And then, I would also say that one of the biggest myths, at least that I think I had for a long time, was that the editor that you're pitching is the only person that's deciding whether that story gets accepted or not. The reality is that we go over pitches as a team. So I have my writers, or I get, cold pitches, and I'll go through them, and I will, either get back to that writer asking for more information, or get them to kind of reframe it slightly, or, sometimes I can just see off the bat that something's not right for us. But all the pitches that I'm excited about, I then bring to a weekly pitch meeting, and it's quite a democratic process. We then sit through, and each editor goes through the pitches they're sitting on, and we kind of talk about where it could live either on the site or in the magazine, how we might want to reshape it, if there are overlaps in coverage on something that another editor's on, and it's, a way of us, we really hash it out. So that's also why sometimes the pitching process can kind of feel like pulling teeth, because it's not as quick as an editor reading it and making a decision there and then. There's kind of a whole process and a bunch of boxes to get ticked before that pitch gets greenlit. But once you're kind of, especially if you've never worked with that publication before, once you've kind of got that first story assigned, it then becomes inherently easier to land more stories, because you've, again, like I said, you've built up a relationship, the editor knows your voice, and you as a writer start to actually figure out what stories work. And you might be sitting some other pitches and be like, I'm actually not going to waste my time pitching this to Traveler, because I know it's not going to work for them. So I'm immediately going to take it somewhere.
Right. To your point about starting to build a relationship with editors, I believe I think we've got a question that ties into that. So I'll just go to that. Someone is asking that they've heard that a lot of editors are on Twitter, and is that a good way to go about building relationships? Because it seems hard to connect with editors outside of email, and I can imagine their inbox is it's a barrage of pitches. So I mean, I'm sure every editor is different, but like, is there some a rule of thumb around building a relationship outside of a cold email, so to speak?
Oh, it's hard, right? Yeah, my inbox is kind of the cloud that hangs over my head every day. But I mean, again, it's like every editor is different. I have Twitter. I welcome people to reach out to me on Twitter. I actually will probably see a DM faster than I will see an email in my inbox. But I also am not the most prolific tweeter, and I don't rely on Twitter that much. Beyond, I will say, actually discovering new writers. And so if I see a story by a writer I like, that I'm interested in, I will follow them on Twitter, and start to look at the stories they're tweeting. So I think tweeting your stories and being kind of a bit of a publicist for yourself can be helpful, because it just means, editors are lurking on Twitter and watching. So I'd say there's definitely value in that. I would say feel comfortable following up over email within reason. I don't think if you email on a Friday, there's no need to follow up on a Monday, because chances are I just haven't even seen it. But definitely feel comfortable following up, and I always appreciate the nudge. And I also would say that I am always happy to hop on the phone. I think sometimes talking through actually as human beings rather than over email can be really helpful in developing story ideas. And sometimes a pitch comes through, like a cold pitch comes through, and I can see there's like a kernel of an idea. And it just is sometimes helpful to hop on the phone and talk it out. And just by having that sort of that time and that opportunity for more of a dialogue, I think just immediately starts to develop those relationships. But like, I do acknowledge that sometimes the masthead of a magazine can feel impenetrable. And I think, you know, there's a whole bunch of reasons to do with resourcing and inboxes. That's usually why. But we have one thing that we do, and we have it on our site, which we can share after this conversation or whatever is like easiest, is we have a page on our site which is how to pitch Condé Nast Traveler, and we list our beats on that page, and then any kind of special packages we're working on, and the editor's name who's actually overseeing that sort of content is listed by it. And so I would, you know, when you're cold pitching, don't just like kind of do a blast to everyone and hope that someone gets back to you. Look at who is owning that beat and that topic and reach out to them, and you are probably more likely to get a response.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that. And your point about, you know, essentially being your own PR is a very good one. Again, sometimes I think a lot of creatives really can struggle with just putting themselves out there. So it's kind of pushing yourself beyond that fear of whether it's being judged or thinking that your work is not good enough. I know I've struggled with that as a writer in the past. And I always say writing on my blog or wherever, it's both a public experience and an intimate thing or intimidating thing. So I mean, if there are other writers or creators in the room, I'm going to encourage you to just keep putting yourself out there, challenging yourself, and yeah, don't be afraid. That's what I will say to you, because I dealt with a lot of fear about these things. So yeah. Okay, Lale, I want to come to storylines. You've mentioned that there are kind of different beats and, you know, different features that are either going to be print or in the digital edition. So I mean, just speaking more generally, what sort of storylines is Condé Nast Traveler looking for over the next few months?
So this time of year is always interesting for us because we are planning our 2023 editorial calendar, which is not quite finalized yet. Otherwise, I would share everything for the beginning of the year as well. I think as we're looking towards the kind of last few months of the year, we're looking, you know, online, we're looking for pieces centered around a lot of service, centered around holiday travel and seasonal travel. We're really looking to ramp up our ski content, for example, which is something we've been slightly lacking in the last few years. I'm also really interested in increasing our style and design coverage and the way that it overlaps with travel. That's something we're starting to think more about again. And then also another push that we're giving is the return of business travel and all the different ways in which that can manifest, because it's kind of not the person in the suit with the briefcase going through an airport lounge anymore. All sorts of different people travel for work, and there's, you know, obviously digital nomads. So really, I think now that travel is fully sort of returned, kind of exploring that, because that's been on hold for a couple of years. And then I also think just, you know, there are like specific things that are seasonal that we're looking for, like I just mentioned, or that are kind of gaps in our content. But I would also just really familiarize yourself with our site and our site structure. And if you look at the different verticals and the different kind of like sub-channels within them, it can give you a really good idea of exactly what we're looking for. So, you know, it's road trips, it's national parks, it's the outdoors, it's food writing, and kind of, you know, if there's certain ones that you feel that you're strong at or you want to build up more clips under, like take a look at the stories we've done recently under those drop downs. And I actually think simply familiarizing yourself with the site architecture will be really helpful in terms of figuring out what we're looking for right now. And then I had like one other point, but you know, it'll come to me.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of wanting to get a broader overview of some of the features. I know, for instance, Condé Nast does you know, like word of mouth. There are certain features in the magazine that I personally love to read. Word of mouth, staycation. I think there's a fantasy lifestyle, something like that. The style file, not exactly a fashionista, but I do love to read the style file and flavor hunter. So, I mean, for people listening and, you know, looking at where they might fit, yeah, I would definitely encourage you to check out the architecture of the website, as Lale is suggesting, and just see where you might naturally fit with your writing or your pitch. Do you have a favorite feature in the magazine or digital version yourself, Lale?
Oh God, that's a big question. I will say I love our word of mouth section in the magazine. I really like our Walk This Block series, which is takes a block in a neighborhood in a different city. I think it's either every issue or every couple of issues, and really dives into everything that is new and interesting and cool and the people behind it. So I like that as a recurring feature. I'm biased because I oversee a lot of it, but I'm always excited about our Women Who Travel content and the stories that we get pitched for that. Because it just feels like a space to tell a lot of travel stories and travel adjacent stories that haven't necessarily appeared in like mainstream travel publications up until now. And I think it's been a really exciting place to just kind of experiment a little bit and approach travel in a different way, travel content in a different way. So I love working on that. And then I think it's maybe just because I've recently really gotten into hiking, but I'm really enjoying all of our outdoors content and our national parks content, and just anything that feels dreamy and escapist. But this is all my personal preferences at the moment. And that's just what I'm enjoying using my time
in. All right, let's home in a bit more on Black voices, because of course we are the Black Travel Alliance, and people on our memberships are, you know, Black travel writers or travel bloggers, travel podcasters, etc., various mediums. Why are Black stories important to Condé Nast Traveler? Are they important? Why?
They're very important. I think there are a few different ways into this conversation. You know, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and also kind of pertains to what I was talking about with Women Who Travel, is that historically the same people have always told travel stories, and they are usually white presenting men. And if you just keep assigning the same writers the same stories, then we're only ever going to get one point of view. So expanding to have all different types of people with different backgrounds telling travel stories is just going to inherently make our content more interesting and more helpful and speak to more people. And also kind of going back to a point that I made earlier about pitching, is also having the right voices telling stories and having Black voices telling Black stories, and about, you know, people of different backgrounds talking about different destinations and not the same people going into them every time. And so that's kind of one thing, you know, or two things I've been thinking about a lot. And then also, you know, maybe it's cynical to approach it this way, but ultimately, like, a magazine it's a business. And Black travelers in 2019 accounted for 13% of the US leisure travel market. I think it was something like $110 billion was put into the travel industry by Black travelers. That is a huge component of the travel market. So why are magazines not serving that audience? It's crazy. So I think that is also, you know, if we want people to read our magazine, we have to speak to the people buying it.
Yep. I think there's a huge gap, and as you say, this is, you know, the travel industry's one of the travel industry's biggest problems, really. So I would be, and I'm sure our room full of travel writers here would be interested to learn what measures have been specifically put in place to welcome more Black writers into Condé Nast contributing writer roster, let's say.
So definitely there have been a few ways in which we're tackling it. I also will say that there is never a point in which that work is done. And I think one way that we've been going into it is we've begun auditing our contributor base, because every editor has their bank of writers, and quite often we're not necessarily communicating with each other as to who we have covering what thing. And so actually zooming out and looking at everyone that works with us and starting to see, okay, like, where are our problems? Do we have too many of like one type of person, one type of voice covering one topic? And really, looking at how we can diversify that base and make it more equitable. And then also, internally on, thinking of ways for us to discover new writers. This is like a really small move, but I think it's been really useful for editors, is that we have a Slack channel now where if you are looking to assign a story and you want to find a new writer for it and source a new writer, then you put the story in there, and other editors will either be like, I worked with this person, I thought they were great, or I saw this writer cover this topic somewhere else, like I would suggest you reach out to them. And just kind of having more of like an ongoing conversation about how to source new writers in spaces like that has been really helpful. One other thing that we have been testing out a little bit, which I think has been really interesting, is, again, going back to that topic of when someone pitches a story that's really interesting, but we don't think that the writer is the right person to tell it, offering them an idea fee and saying, we love this idea, we think there might be a more appropriate writer to tell the story. Would you accept an idea fee and let us still run with it? And then we will reach out to a writer that we think is a better fit. And that's been kind of an interesting process that we'd never tried before. And then I think also,
do you mind how have reactions to that been in the instances that you've
actually been really
had to do?
It's been really positive. I think we were like a little bit apprehensive. And I wouldn't say we've done it like a huge amount yet. Definitely is something we've just been testing out. But I've been like really happy to see what people's responses have been, and people have, for the most part, have been open to it. And I think kind of speaks to just people's consciousness in general. And then, and then I also think it's another thing that we are working to do, and that is on the minds of editors, is actually just doing the work to find new writers and develop those relationships. I was talking earlier about, if you're a freelancer kind of starting out trying to build relationships with editors, and while that is on the writer, it's also on the editor to do that. And I think we need to get better about reaching out to writers who haven't worked with us before and starting to build those relationships, and bringing the wall down when it comes to pitching. Like we were talking about how sort of impenetrable the masthead can feel like, and that means that the same people who have broken through it will continue to pitch and land their stories. So it's like, how can we make ourselves more accessible?
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, not necessarily, I mean, I want to get more into what not to pitch. Because we're getting some tips on what to pitch, what to look out for, who to reach out to, based on what, the tips you're giving. But are there some straight no-nos that, for Condé Nast, straight away, this is not for us as a magazine, that you can share with us?
I think it sounds obvious. It has to have a strong travel angle. If it doesn't come across immediately as a travel story, then you need to pitch it somewhere else. And sometimes I think there's just pieces that are exciting and you want to talk about, but it's just, it has to have a travel angle to it. I think if you have already written a similar story for a competitive outlet, don't pitch it again. Sometimes I get it. It's like the freelance space is competitive and everyone's got to make money, but we're not going to want to run a story that has already run on a different website. It's just not in our interest or in that publication's interest either. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. And also that it isn't just the story that the publicist has given you, right? It can't be a regurgitation of a press release. And usually I think you can tell pretty quickly in a pitch whether it is. Everyone's working so quickly. People have so many stories in the air at the same time. Like, I totally understand how sometimes you're like, okay, this seems interesting, I'm just going to forward it along. But like, just, take 10 minutes to dress it up a little bit and kind of give your point of view and your own framing. So I would say those are kind of big no-nos.
Okay. I think, that's totally fair enough. I'm going to come to a few questions we've had in the comments. There's one from Sakina who says, how does a non-profit focused on travel get featured?
That is a great question. I would say, I'm assuming this is from the perspective of the non-profit business rather than the writer. But it would be, pitch the non-profit, whether it's through a press release or outreach. Pitch it, get in touch with me or another editor, and we can start a conversation about it. We definitely cover non-profits. There's, we're kind of, we try to cover a whole breadth of different businesses and organizations and movements within the travel industry. It is, yes, Condé Nast Traveler is a luxury publication, but I think what falls under that very large umbrella is wide reaching. So definitely, sell the story. And I think we'd be interested to listen.
Okay. Thank you for that. There's another question here from Sojourner White, who says, I'm a traveling remote social worker. Are you looking for more tips-based business travel or essay type pitches? I think this question was related to your earlier point about how you're reimagining business travel content. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so definitely looking for, I think, some first person content. I think we want our business travel doesn't feel like the right word. It's like work travel.
It's a new ball game now with we're still in the pandemic, but workation and the way we travel and hybrid working / holiday.
It takes so many different forms, right? So I think, and we want it to be very people first, and kind of hearing from a whole breadth of different experiences. I think that content is going to be service forward, and probably when we're spotlighting different types of work travelers, it's going to be more interview focused. But I think there will be a space for first person essays, especially if you have a particularly unique story to tell. So yeah, I would say reach out. Be happy to learn more about that experience.
Okay. We have another question. Could you share how Condé Nast Traveler is looking at food, or what does a successful food pitch look like?
Oh,
so now we're diving into the flavor hunter type pitches.
I could talk about food forever. Food is such a great topic when it comes to travel because the two just overlap so much. And we have a few different ways that we approach it. It's through reported pieces on trends, rising food trends that you might be finding around the world. It's, we have some essays as well. And also reported features that kind of really dive into a certain dish or community or food scene at a destination. And then we also have our destinations guides, which are, you know, very service forward and guide-based content that that always touches on food, whether it's roundups of best restaurants in a certain destination or city, best bars, all that stuff. So, you know, I think especially if you are based somewhere that we are covering in our destination guides and have a lot of intel on the food there and where to eat, that is also, you know, really sell your expertise on that destination or that region or that cuisine. And I will say that actually, like, you know, goes beyond food, especially for our destinations guides. We're always looking for writers who are based in the places that we cover. That's like a really important pillar of how we tackle those places. So if you are based in, I don't know, Singapore, for example, get in touch with us and tell us why you have such an authority on that destination, because that's something we're always looking for. I took that off on a tangent, but all to say, all sorts of food content.
I think that was pretty.
Okay, good.
We have another question from Karita, who says, is there space for family travel content? I find it difficult to pitch because many publications aren't featuring or focusing on family travel content. Can you give us some insight into how you approach specifically family travel content for the magazine?
Yeah, we actually have like sort of developed quite a robust base of family travel content over the last few years. I think first and foremost, the content we're looking for is content that's really serviceable, that's going to, you know, firstly speak to all sorts of families. And, you know, I think when we think of family travel, we immediately think of a family that's traveling with young kids. But really, there's so many different ways to talk about family travel and multi-generational family travel. So we're looking for a really wide breadth of family travel experiences and stories, but also that's super, super serviceable, like I said. So really stories that can guide people to making their travel decisions and their plans for and with their families. And then inspiration as well. So ideas for family travel, whether it's roundups, especially seasonal roundups, is something that we're always looking for. And then some first-person content as well. We run some first-person stuff about experiences traveling with children or older parents, or, you know, all sorts of different family travel experiences.
Okay, that's fantastic. Another one, there is a lack of representation of LGBTQ plus POC. We've been trying to push diversity within travel, including Black LGBTQ plus content. We haven't been successful, but is that an angle that can be used? This is another question in the comments.
That is definitely an angle that can be used and should be featured more. It is a loss to travel publications and the travel industry to not be covering more of those stories and speaking to that audience. So do not be deterred, and like, please reach out to me, and I would love to talk more about what that coverage could look like, because it is a gap that needs to be filled.
Someone wants to know, how much is your idea fee?
Oh my God, I have to look it up. I'm not gonna say it in case I say it wrong. I will say it is not particularly robust compared to what the story rate would be, but it is something, and I can dig it up and share it after this for sure. I just don't want to say the wrong number.
And no, that's understandable. If you took that idea, does that mean that the person cannot pitch it elsewhere? Is that, what's the sort of terms and conditions around that, the usage of that idea?
Yes, I would say it's kind of like you've kind of given up that idea. And I will say, like, I don't know if I've like opened up a can of worms by bringing that up. I will say it's not like a regular rule of thumb, but it's something we've been trying out, because sometimes there are great stories that people pitch, and it's just like, you're not the right person to tell the story, but the story needs to be told and we want it. So, what's the kind of middle ground where we can find the right writer and then also honor the fact that someone had that idea and compensate them for it, rather than either not running the story at all or doing what should never happen, which is taking that idea and running it.
Right. Okay. All right. Another question from Ciara. What type of content are you looking for when it comes to national parks and outdoor travel?
Ooh, fun. So it's definitely seasonal. We ramp up our coverage a lot come spring, summer, but I think also thinking about shoulder season and off season, the national parks the last few years, I think partly because of COVID and everyone being desperate to, kind of be outside and gather safely outside, meant that the national parks some of them got really overwhelmed. And so I think stories that highlight lesser known national parks so that we can direct people to a greater breadth of them. So not everyone is just going to the same parks and overwhelming those systems. Is some great content to pitch. And I think that's like very evergreen. I think stories that are about how to be responsible when you're visiting national parks, educating yourself about that land, whose land it is really important and definitely of interest to us. And also, who doesn't love just a big, beautiful national parks roundup? So anything that's super inspirational as well is always of interest. And then in terms of kind of greater outdoors coverage, for, thinking of women who travel, I'm really interested to, the outdoor space is so dominated by white presenting cis men for a long time that I'm really interested in all the other outdoors communities that are actually trying to make it a more accessible space. We ran a package a couple of years ago that tapped into that, and we highlighted a whole bunch of different women across America in the outdoor space that are doing like really interesting work and really cool work. And so whether it's rock climbers or free divers or surfers or runners, highlighting those people in those organizations is of like great interest to me as well.
That's fantastic. I think we've got some great ideas in there. So hopefully folks have been noting down what you're saying specifically about national parks and the outdoors. On to our next question. This one from Marty, and she says, can we get into headlines? And you don't have to give like literally in this 2 seconds. You might need some time to think about it. But she's saying, can you give 1 or 2 examples of head-turning headlines? For instance, what would be a good one that you've seen or have come across for Las Vegas that, kind of caught your attention? And I'm curious as well, because of course, Vegas is a destination that everyone knows. Like, what haven't you read about Vegas at this point? So what could catch your attention? What sort of headline could grab your attention on first read about a popular destination?
Excellent and difficult question. So I think firstly, just kind of zoom out a bit, really in that headline. And, what you pitch as the headline is probably not going to end up being what it lands at, especially because it's before you've written the story. But really, it's got to have the kind of who, what, and why in there in a concise way. Like, what is this story about and who is this story about? And then, specific to Las Vegas, a piece that we did a few years ago that I really, really enjoyed, which was part of a package we did on late night food, was the headline, and I'm not going to say it verbatim, but the essence of the headline was where Vegas chefs eat after dark. And so the piece was, so you think Vegas, it's such a well-known destination, but where are the people who work there and who are making your food actually going when they're off the clock, and where do they hang out? And so, it's like scratching under the surface of that like very well-trodden, well-known destination and giving a new insight into it, and kind of packing that that spirit of that story in a very clear, concise way into the headline is going to be kind of what grabs my attention.
Yeah. Okay. How does a content creator get considered for an Instagram takeover?
So I would say for the most part, anyone who does an Instagram takeover for us is usually already a contributor. So the Instagram takeovers are usually linked to a piece that they've already written on the site. We'll bake it into the assignment. And, you know, particularly with, for anyone who's familiar with our Instagram account, they might have noticed that we have our first in series of Instagram takeovers, which is a tour of a new hotel room and hotel kind of property. And that is because we have a column called First In, which is our review column. When a new hotel opens, we get the first look. And that is both assigned to staff and to freelance contributors. It's kind of like an add-on. So usually the takeovers you see are attached to a story. And also just kind of in a like behind the scenes kind of strategy side of things. It's kind of only in our interest to have a takeover that can actually link back to our website and, you know, bring the audience back to the content so that we can drive up our KPIs. So it's, you know, it's a means of promoting the story and promoting the content. That said, if you have had access to something truly extraordinary that you think could warrant a standalone takeover, pitch it and can start up a conversation with our social media director. But for the most part, it's usually attached to a story that we're already running.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We have a question from Tony also in the comments. Do you have any advice for people acting as the editor for their own publication or website that are looking to partner?
Partner with Traveler? Do you think?
I presume so. I think so. I think, yeah. Do you have any sort of side partnerships like that with perhaps people that write for themselves, write for their own websites or blogs or whatever that may look like?
I don't know if we've ever historically collaborated with a publication that is outside of Condé Nast. Like we've done some crossovers and partnerships with other Condé Nast publications because essentially we're all owned by the same company.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've ever partnered with something outside of Condé Nast. That's not to say that there can't be opportunities for some level of crossover. You know, I think if you have a platform or a blog that you think really that you would really like to get, that makes sense for Traveler to spotlight, then pitching an op-ed, for example, like a first-person piece or an opinion piece that's kind of putting a stake in the ground about what you cover, that can be a way for us to shine a light on your work. But in terms of kind of like more robust partnerships, I can't think of anything that we've done. Not to say that it's not possible in the future. I'm just like not quite sure what it would be.
Yeah, that's fair enough. A question from Rick. How do photo first travel guides rank in CNT priorities?
So we run photo essays, and that's actually something we're interested in doing more of. And it's like a really nice space to spotlight rising photographers as well as more established photographers, and to be able to kind of get a glimpse of a place or a story or a community through visuals first, rather than copy. And then I would say that when we do guides, obviously the images are really, really, really important. And I think I was actually talking to someone the other day about this. If you are a writer and a photographer, then really sell yourself as both of those things when you pitch, and sell, you know, say that you can also shoot the story and provide imagery, because that's kind of like striking gold as an editor. And also it means that you can bump up your rate, because you can bake in you can be like, I'm giving you two things. So you can actually have a higher rate for the story if you're providing photos as well as copy. So also think about that when you're like negotiating the rate with an editor, because sometimes I think writers do themselves a disservice by trying to sell the story by saying I can also provide photos, but then not necessarily actually asking for the money
or compensation. Yeah. Good tip, folks. Hope you make a note of that. Yes, exactly. And add tax, people. Another question from Stan in the comments: has Condé Nast ever assigned a piece to a writer after seeing their blog?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I'm not going to sort of confidently shout out any specific examples in case I'm misremembering, but definitely. And I think, you know, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning in terms of being your, you know, promoting yourself and getting your writing out there, you know, I think if you're writing on your blog and you're tweeting it and you're kind of really, really promoting the stories that you're telling and the voice that you have, then yeah, like definitely, there are definitely times where we're like, we want something covered and we have to find the right person to cover it. And sometimes it's by discovering someone's blog.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and sometimes someone's just a talented writer and you see the blog and you're like, okay, great, I want to work with this person.
Yeah. Great. Kay in the comments wants to know what the timeline looks like for contributors. So from pitch to editing to publishing, what's the sort of typical timeline for that process?
So it really varies depending on the type of story that you're pitching. If it's a quick turnaround news piece, then you could pitch it on a Monday and it could be published by a Wednesday. If it is going to require more reporting or some travel, then obviously that lead time is going to be longer. We will, for online, we will usually assign things at least 3 weeks to a month out. And then usually we give ourselves, after the deadline, a 2-week buffer for editing before it actually is scheduled to go live. Sometimes we will assign things even further ahead than that, especially if it's something seasonal and we want to get ahead of it. And we'll be like, okay, we know we're going to need to do this story in September. It's June now, but let's just assign it. And then for print, you know, kind of what we were talking about earlier, the lead times are super, super long. So really think about that when if you do want to pitch for print, really kind of factor that in to your pitch and think, okay, like I have a summer story I want to pitch for print. When is actually the best time to pitch it? And it's probably going to be like January or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, it really varies from story to story.
Sure. All right then. And looking at more specific, you know, the travel resources type of features or sections, what are you looking for over the next few months in terms of coverage? This is a question from Tony in the comments as well. What are you looking for in travel resources to cover?
I think kind of, again, a lot of service around this, and again, I'm speaking on kind of in terms of online, a lot of service for holiday travel, inspiration. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut across all of our verticals. But I think, you know, this is always the time of year when we're trying to be super serviceable because we're going into like kind of one of the busiest travel times of the year. And then, yeah, I think that, and then anything that's kind of like, you know, we have so many holidays coming up, especially like in different parts of the world. So kind of stories that can tap into that, you know, as we go into early next year, we're getting into carnival season. So that, you know, I know we're looking for some of those stories as well. So just a few things to think about. But I also like wouldn't try as a writer to get too in your own head, second guessing what we're looking for. I think if you have a good story that has like some level of newsiness to it, or a time peg or seasonality, or if you just think it's a story that hasn't been told before, don't wait, just pitch it, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah. All right. We are just about wrapping up, but I've got some maybe 3 pressing questions that I can, if you don't have to jump over in the next 2 seconds.
Oh yeah, I can answer a couple more.
Okay. All right. This one is related to when we were talking about photos, but more generally, Sharinda wants to know, are contributors responsible for the visuals and photos within an article? And should they be submitted with a pitch? This is a more general ask around visuals for the pitch.
That's a really good question. In general, I would say a writer's responsibility goes as far as providing the press contacts or the contact for the source if they're going to have images featured in the piece. But we have a photo editor who will do all the image research and sourcing. So it's really, as a writer, it's just providing the contacts that you've used to set up your interview or your whatever your reporting looks like. If you've stayed at a specific hotel, then it, as part of the story, it's getting the publicist contact for our photo editor. But you do not have to be responsible for sourcing the images. You just need to kind of help us do it.
Thank you. And my last one, is there any interest in personal experiences while traveling, for example, finding of death or something similar? This is a question from Nina.
Yes, definitely. Over the years, we've run a couple of personal essays related to grief, which I think has been a really interesting way to talk about travel. And I think I also think that travel can be a platform to basically talk about anything else. It touches our lives in so many different ways. And I think on the subject of death and grief, there's it's a lot to talk about in the context of travel and traveling. So, yeah, please reach out with any ideas you have, or even if it's just a conversation you just want to start.
Lale, thank you so much for your time. I want to wrap up by asking you to share, if you would like to, where people can find you online.
Oh, well, you can find me on Instagram at Lale Hannah. And I'll just share my email now. My Condé Nast email is Lale, LALE _ and then my last name, ARIKOGLU @condenast.com. And if I don't get back to you, just follow up, because I'm at 1,000 unread and counting today. So just nudge me.
Follow up within reason. Lale, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and being so approachable, and hopefully we will be able to carry the conversation forward into, bringing more Black voices into various aspects of travel writing for Condé Nast, and more publications, legacy or otherwise. So thank you very much for your time this evening. I hope everyone's had a lot from this session.
I know. I hope I didn't just I hope it wasn't too much of a word vomit, but I had a lot of fun. This was great. And I'm sorry that I'm in my cave of an apartment and I maybe look a bit of a silhouette, but it's been such a joy. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And to everyone, thanks for your time this evening. As Marty said in the beginning, the recording will be available. So make sure you're subscribed to the Black Travel Alliance newsletter, and do check the YouTube as well. And you'll have the recording for anything you might have missed in the beginning. So thank you all for your time. I've been Davida, and I'm on Instagram at Wonders of Wonders. And yeah, I shall see you online at some point soon. Lale, have a wonderful rest of the day and a nice weekend. And to everyone, see you soon.
Thanks so much.
Bye.